Rob's living in the Philippines here. And this is going to be about postnatal abortion, right? Postnatal abortion. So bear with me, I know it's a cracker. Before we go there, we need the money. So please, go to one of our funding sites, Patreon, PayPal, Ko-Fi, Buy Me a Coffee, any of these, and just stick your hand in your pocket. Be nice, be generous. You don't have to give a lot, but you really should give something. You shouldn't be taking stuff for nothing, you know? Anyway, let's put up the site details and then we can get on with the show. So, to return to the topic for today, which is after birth abortion. It sounds like after dinner mince, doesn't it? You know. Anyway, this is actually quite an old paper. It was published, I think, around about 2012. Let me just check for you. Yeah, March 2012. And it was written by a couple of ethicists, right? So obviously eggheads, you know, PhDs and that sort of shit. And what they would like to say, and they published this paper in the Journal of Medical Ethics. Just move this a little bit so that you can get a better look here. Journal of Medical Ethics. Alberto Giubellini and Francesca Minerva, and entitled their paper, After Birth Abortion, Why Should the Baby Live? Explores the ethics of killing newborn children, right? And let's just read from the abstract to this paper, okay? And it's going to shock you. Abortion is largely accepted even for reasons that do not have anything to do with the fetus' health. By showing that 1, both fetuses and newborns do not have the same moral status as actual persons. 2, the fact that both are potential persons is morally irrelevant. And 3, adoption is not always in the best interests of actual people. The authors argue that what we might call after-birth abortion, killing a newborn baby, should be permissible in all cases where abortion is, including cases where the newborn is not disabled. So what they're actually arguing for, and these are ethicists, so you know, they do tend to play devil's advocate, but it does seem that they are sincere about this, that they think that it's perfectly permissible to murder newborn babies. So let's go on to, they explain, in spite of the oxymoron in the expression, we propose to call this practice after-birth abortion, rather than infanticide, because, you know, everybody hates infanticide, you know, and you can't call it that, to emphasize the moral status that the individual killed is comparable with that of a fetus. Now, they go on at great length to try to justify this point of view, which, in my opinion, is absolutely shocking, morally reprehensible, and should never have been published. Frankly, even as, you know, a provocation piece. It's just too strong. And I will give you the link to it. It's really horrific. This argument depends on, their argument depends on this following argument, which is that a dependent child is not a real person. Right? And that doesn't matter, you see, whether that child is actually still in the womb, you know, as a whatever, 14-week-old fetus, or out in the world as a 9-year-old child. The 9-year-old child simply cannot look after himself or herself. Can't be done. They're dependent. And what is the core argument here is that dependency on others means that you're not an actual person. And they use these words they call actual person. You know, that I'm an actual person, but someone who has, well, Downs, for example, cerebral palsy, or is otherwise incapable of looking after themselves, they're not actual people, and therefore they could be offed, morally, just like that. And the argument that is being used, where this argument comes from, and you tease out the logic, is that if it's okay to murder babies in the womb, then it must be okay to murder them after they're born. Because after all, they're still completely dependent on their mothers. Or at least on someone else. They're not autonomous. They're not independent. Therefore, they're not, according to this, real people, or actual people rather, is the words they use. Existing person, there's another one. They seem to like this, the death of an existing person. This is, you know, the moral turpitude that is expressed in this article, in this paper, is completely horrifying. But it comes from this simple understanding that if it's all right to murder a fetus in the womb, then it must be all right to murder a child. That's okay. The child's not independent, not a real person, not an, what's the word? An existing person. It's not an existing person. And that is because it doesn't, I'll not go into details, but it doesn't have the intellectual capacity and the ability to manage its own affairs in life that an existing person does have. Now, I'm a very weird sort of Christian, but you know, I am a Christian. I do believe that Christ was a real person, and I think that his teachings are extremely worth following. I find this whole line of argument totally abhorrent. It's talking about the killing of the weakest people in society. Now, here's the thing. The problem is that the writers of this paper, which may well have been written as a provocation, you know, because that's quite common amongst ethicists, that they'll write papers which really are, you know, offensive, and the reason is to provoke debate, you know, to try and, it's not actually what they think, it's just like they're saying, right, okay, what about this? What about this logical construct? And the logic is infallible. You can't criticize it. If it's okay to murder fetuses, then it must be okay to murder babies. They're the same thing. They're not independent. They're not an existing person, right? But the opposite must hold true, right? If it's not okay to kill a baby or a child or a person with Downs or someone with cerebral palsy, or, you know, there's a whole range of things, someone with autism. If it's not all right to kill those people, it is also not all right to murder fetuses. It's just wrong. It can't be defended. It's ethically and morally repugnant. Right? You can't have the two. And this paper, I mean, I can't actually read this without thinking these people are really trying to wind us up here. Do read it yourself, because it's very interesting. But they play the devil's advocate very, very well. I mean, they might actually think this. If it's okay to murder fetuses in the womb, then it must be all right to murder other classes of people who are dependent, such that they're not what these people would call an existing person. Right? You just let that sink in a minute. You know? It's clearly not all right to murder babies. It's clearly not all right to murder people with Down syndrome. It doesn't matter whether you murder them in the womb or whether you murder them after birth. It's the same thing. You're still killing them. And that's what these people are saying. You're killing them. Doesn't matter. You know, you go to Iceland they have no Down syndrome. Why do they not have any Down syndrome? They're all murdered in the womb. Is that right? Is that morally acceptable? Does that stink a little bit of the gas chambers? Does that smell like, piles of bodies somewhere? Does it smell of Zyklon B, maybe? Because to me it does. It's exactly the same thing. You've got a class of people who are existing persons and a class of people who are not. And you can do anything you like to them. And it doesn't matter how old they are. They could be 3 days after conception, or even the instant after conception, or they could be, 8, 9, 10, if they've got a disability, older. You still can't kill them. If it's all right to kill the one, it must be all right to kill the other. And if it's not all right to kill one, it must not be all right to kill the other. If it's not all right to kill children, because they're dependent on whatever, then it's not all right to murder babies in the womb. Abortion is therefore morally repugnant and it must be stopped. It's just as offensive as killing a child outside the womb. Go outside and find yourself a 3-year-old, kill him, her, whatever. Yet we find that shocking. We find that, images of children washed up on Turkish beaches and everybody goes absolutely nuts. But they don't care that there are 60 million dead babies have been killed by abortionists in the United States since 1973 and the passing of the odious Roe versus Wade judgment. I'm sorry, and I'll address this directly. Women absolutely do have bodily autonomy. They do have the right over their own body. They do not have the right to kill other people, even when they're inside their body. And it doesn't matter how they got in there. Doesn't matter if it was rape. Doesn't matter anything like that. It's just a crazy drunken night when you forgot to keep the aspirin in place. That's all. You don't have the right to kill that person. And a person, you can ask all the crap you like about personality, but the individual begins at conception. Cannot change that. The life of the individual begins. We shouldn't actually have birthdays. Why should we have birthdays? The day you fell out. You should have conception days. That's the day you actually started your journey. That's when you were created. Why don't we have that instead of birthdays? Probably because it's just a lot easier to be sure when you were actually born, Read this paper, please, and have a good think about it. Think what it means as regards the abortion argument. I mean, in my opinion, there is no valid abortion argument. It's an appalling thing. And no culture that accepts it or permits it can call itself civilized. Not one. And I don't care about legions of women getting hysterical about it. Too bad. I'm still going to say the truth. It's murder. It shouldn't happen. Bye-zy.